Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. Over the past few weeks, Israel has found itself pulled in two very different directions, both deeply consequential and impossible to ignore. On one front, the Middle East is once again holding its breath. The standoff with Iran is intensifying, action seems imminent, and American military assets have deployed all over the region. Diplomacy is competing with deterrence, and one central question hangs. What will Donald Trump do? Will he choose force or negotiation, or maybe something in between? And perhaps even more importantly, what will Israel do in what happens next? But while Israel watches Tehran and Washington, there's another challenge that's unfolding much closer to home, one that is no less strategic and looks really different. It's the debate over the Haredi military draft, and it has reached a boiling point. It's no longer just a question or political dispute about budgets, exemptions, or coalition agreements. It's becoming a question about the nature of Israeli solidarity, of our society, the meaning of shared sacrifice, social cohesion during a time of war and great trepidation. The tension was on stark display just a few days ago in Bnei Brak, last week, when two female IDF soldiers were almost lynched, yes, that's the way to describe it, by a mob. An incident that should shock us all, not because just of the violence itself, but what it symbolized. The fracture between the different communities, between the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox, and all the rest of Israel, those who serve and those who want to serve. Taken together, these developments raise a difficult but unavoidable question. How does Israel confront simultaneous challenges from without, those that are external, Iran, and from within, the draft of the Haredi? Can a society sustain strategic clarity while struggling with internal disputes over identity, responsibility, and belonging? To unpack these overlapping pressures, I'm joined today by two people who think deeply about Israeli society, politics, and strategy from different but complementary perspectives. Shmuel Rosner is a senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute. He's a widely read columnist, one of Israel's sharpest observers of political and public opinion and identity, and recently came out with a new book on Haredim and the challenge that Israel faces. And Shuki Friedman is the vice president of JPPI. He's a leading expert on religion and state, but he's also spent some time in Israel's intelligence services, and has a unique perspective on what's happening inside Iran, not just on the regime level, but also within civil society, what the Iranian people are hoping is going to be coming in the next few days. Together, we talk about Iran, we talk about Trump, we talk about deterrence, diplomacy, but also social cohesion, the draft debate, and what does it look like as Israel gets every day a little closer to the fateful elections that will be held sometime in the next 6 months. Stay with us. Shuki and Shmuel, it's great to have you both back on the podcast. And of course, there's so much to talk about. First and foremost is we're still on the Iran watch. What will happen? What might not happen? How will it happen? Whether it will happen? Obviously, all indications are that the president of the United States, Donald Trump, is still very much committed to trying to exhaust diplomatic opportunities and options to try to reach a deal. But he has those forces that he's used in the past, the term of being locked and loaded in the region and prepared for maybe what he calls lethal force if needed. And of course, us in Israel are really watching every movement, Rubio's going to brief congressmen. What does that mean? This plane is moving that way. This vessel is now such and such a distance from crossing into the Arabian Gulf or into the East Med. With great anxiety. The view from the United States is slightly a bit different, but I want to start with the external threats that we're facing, and then I want to talk about some of the more internal issues, particularly the Haredim, which we'll get to in a moment. But first, Shuki, we're recording this Tuesday evening, Jerusalem time. How do you see, as this point that we're at right now, where things are looking from your perspective on the chances of an attack by the end of the week?
It's really very hard to predict. For about a month and a half, Israelis are afraid of going out and back to Israel because maybe they'll stuck abroad. And I think every Israeli following the Ford, getting closer and closer to the coast of Israel. So on the other one hand, I think that the United States have a power that since the Second Gulf War never been here and around in the Middle East, and they are fully ready to the command of the president that made clear that he is the one who made the decision. On the other hand, there will be, or should be, another circle of negotiation in Switzerland in 2 days, and it's given opportunity for the Iranians to have another shot towards the president and to try to postpone an attack. But I think, as always in Trump's case, it's really hard to guess when and whether to take the decision. No question, it's getting closer to an attack, and in my guess or estimation, I think that he will attack at the end.
He will attack because the Iranians, the maximum of what they can give will not reach the minimum of what he can accept.
You know, he talking about dealing about missiles plans and nuclear and the proxies around the Middle East, and they are willing hardly to talk about some limitation of the nuclear program. So it really doesn't get to even close to each other. And as we've seen in the summer war, he started negotiations and started war, which might again happen this week or soon.
Right. I think, Shmuel, you know, one of the things that I'm currently in Washington, D.C. I was here for the APAC conference, and the feeling is obviously geography does make a difference when we talk about these threats, right? Israel in the thick of it, in the middle of it, potentially going to be hit by missiles. Here, there's oceans surrounding the United States. There's no threat of an immediate missile attack, maybe against forces that are deployed in the region, but not against the U.S. homeland. But even with that said, just the feeling that I've gotten over the last 3 days is very much the president wants a deal. He's doing a lot to get to a deal. And in Israel, it's like the beating of the war drums. War could break out any moment. How do you explain that, like, just disparity, the total different view, the great anxiety in Israel versus the way here that people are kind of more, let's see what happens with diplomacy. Yes, there might be military pressure. You kind of heard that from Steve Witkoff earlier this week. Remember when he said, I don't want to use the word frustrated, but the president is frustrated. I don't want to use the word capitulating, but he's frustrated that the Iranians are not capitulating. In other words, he kind of let the cat out of the bag.
Well, you know, thinking about the current situation, both here in Washington, you have to take into account several factors. We tend to always speak about the unpredictability of President Trump, but in our case now, it's the unpredictability of the Iranians that we should be talking about, because the ball is essentially in their court. They're the ones who should come forward on Thursday with some kind of plan, proposal, suggestion that can, that could make the president less edgy on the issue and the attack. They must offer him something that he could present both to the world, to the American public, and to himself as real achievement. I don't think Trump wants a deal to the extent that he's willing to sign a deal similar to the deal signed by President Obama back in 2015. He needs to show his ability to do something that will be much more impressive. So it's not his unpredictability that we should look at. It's the ability of the Iranians to offer him some kind of ladder with which to climb off the tree. And the tree is quite tall. I can't remember an semblance of such huge American force near a belligerent country that eventually doesn't operate. You know, to gather all these soldiers and ships and aircrafts around Iran only for show, without them responding with total capitulation. I don't think that's something that is feasible. And as for the differences between Washington and Israel, Washington is very far. It's mostly concerned with the snow, as far as I understand. And here in Israel,
not so much snow here, I have to say, but yes.
Okay, so maybe it's to the north of your current location, the issue of snow. But look, here in Israel, we are familiar. We know Iran. I think our understanding of the limitations that the Iranian leadership is going to impose on the negotiators is clearer to Israelis than it is to Americans. And we also understand that the opportunity that presented itself to President Trump right now is an opportunity that might never come back, or not in the near future. Iran is dramatically weakened, and the price for acting is much lower today than what it used to be a year or 2 years ago, and might be much lower today than what it will be 2 years or 5 years down the road. So President Trump is presented with a reason, with an opportunity, and I don't think the threat of Iranian retaliation is so threatening to the president. I think that ultimately, when he looks at the current situation and weighs the cost versus the benefit, I can see the benefit. The cost for him, it's not that high.
It's not that high, but it does fall into these questions.
To mention another factor which is important, crucial even, I think Witkoff mentioned that Iranians are a week from a bomb. If that's true, not a week, let's say, but half a year, and they'll get a bomb, that will be their insurance against any attack. So if this is the situation, the window is even narrower than we think.
I mean, that's obviously issue number one, but I think that also what we're talking about here is the question, at least from the American perspective, of do we want these long wars again? Do we want another war in another Muslim country? I heard Bill O'Reilly, the former Fox News guy, who was talking on a podcast and basically said, look, if we kill Muslims, then we anger Muslims, and then it drags us to another conflict that we don't yet know how that's going to play out. I mean, the Americans obviously have a very different view of this than we do. But I want to ask you, Shuki, about something else, which is that the president essentially put down red lines of what he was going to do if the Iranians did not stop killing people, which they did not stop. He was going to take action. He never took that action. And we have to remember where this began. It all began for the people of Iran who were fighting for their freedom. And those people, their freedom has basically been set aside to some extent, because you have the president who might just take a nuclear deal. Israel wants nuclear missiles and proxies. But the Iranian people were fighting for something completely different. So how does this go down? Let's say there is a deal or even an attack against nuclear facilities, but does nothing to help the Iranian people. What does this mean going forward? And you've spent a lot of time, I know, in your past career looking especially at Iran, at the economy, at the people, at civil society. What does this mean going forward?
First of all, we have to realize it would be very hard, even impossible, to change the regime by only bombing the nuclear facilities or any other facilities around Iran. Historically, there are very rare examples where change of regime happened just due to air campaign against any other country. So the hope that the Iranian regime will collapse, follow a massive attack of the Americans, exists, but it really depends on the Iranians themselves, because I think that in the beginning, and as you mentioned, the rationale of attacking was to support the internal unrest and the willingness of the Iranian people, as we see it through the street and demonstration, the willingness to sacrifice so much for the change of regime. Now, I think that what Trump is considering now is whether there's a chance that this attack will generate again the people of Iran to resist the regime, and more important, if part of the regime internally will go against the supreme leader and the Iranian regime. This is the number one condition for the potential collapse of this evil regime. So it really depends on whether they will attack not only the nuclear facilities, but also the Revolutionary Guards facilities and other branches of the Iranian regime. And again, whether the opposition will be able to unite and domestically and act against the regime in a serious and massive way that make the Iranian regime collapse itself.
Shmuel, before we move on, I want to ask one last question just on the Iran topic for a moment, and that is understanding the U.S. political kind of system and how this plays in here internally in the United States, right? The president has a party that is very much divided on this issue, right? There are those who are looking at this as this is a moment, kind of like what Shuki was talking about, a moment that might not repeat itself. We have to take advantage of it. But there's also a part of the party that feels that this is something that is taking America on a military adventure that is not needed, that doesn't have a purpose, and why should we go out on this? And this is the Israel first, America first divide. We saw the Tucker Carlson, Mike Huckabee interview. I mean, it kind of all plays out right now as we see this happening. You got the midterms coming at the end of the year. How do you see from that perspective the calculation that the president has to make?
I'm not sure that at this point in his career the president is much interested in the internal politics of the Republican Party. Obviously he has advisors and there are people talking to him from within the party and from the military and from other places, and he listens to all of them. But to think that the president is going to decide whether to attack Iran or not based on the prospective chances of a candidate in the 3rd district of Kentucky to win or lose the next midterm election, I don't think that's probable. I think that President Trump at this point in time makes his own decision based on his own instincts and his own beliefs on what is good for America and possibly for his legacy. Again, to say that he can ignore politics altogether would not be true, but by and large, such attack on Iran is something that presidents can do without thinking much about Congress or politics, and ultimately, if the attack is successful, the American people are going to support it. If the attack is not successful, it doesn't much matter if they did support him initially, because he's going to lose the support anyhow. So the only consideration for him is, again, it's the challenge, is the prospect for success, and it's the importance that how important this is for him. And I think at this point in time, when his personal credibility is on the line, after promising to send support for the Iranian people, etc., and calling all these forces to surround Iran, and telling the Iranians that there will be grave results if they don't respond positively to his demands. Other than Iran deciding to give up on a lot of its initial positions, I don't see how President Trump can, avoid an execution of his promised actions.
So let's put aside Iran for a moment, because there was another big story that's taking place in Israel as we speak, and that was last week. We'll start with this at least. 2 female soldiers made their way into the city of Bnei Brak, just near Tel Aviv, a Haredi town, an ultra-Orthodox city, to meet with some family of a soldier, not even give out draft orders, not to search for someone who was dodging the draft, but really a welfare checkup visit, as they're called. And they were, for lack of a better term, they were pretty much lynched almost by a mob that had come out. At the same time that this is happening, and a true abomination, in my opinion, I know that the two of you will agree with me, something that should not happen. We have the Knesset is still trying to get this draft evasion law, or draft dodging law, whatever you want to call it, for the ultra-Orthodox, a new draft law through the Knesset, so that the ultra-Orthodox parties can be on board for the budget that will need to pass at the end of March, and this way potentially give the government a little more time in office and not have to go to an election in June, although unclear when exactly Netanyahu would want an election. Maybe he will want June, maybe he'll want September, maybe he'll want the full term until the end of October, who knows? But this is something I think that was a pivotal moment, and I want to kind of look at what's happening right now. We have those external challenges, but we have a major problem inside Israel that's not being resolved. And Shmuel, I know that you recently came out with a new book on Haredi, so we're going to get to that in a moment. But Shuki, just your first take on where do we stand on this law, and was that moment in Bnei Brak something that might change calculation for the Knesset now, that they might realize this is not going to pass, we can't let this pass?
I want to give a framing or perspective to the two questions. It will demonstrate the challenge we have confront in a wider perspective, and this is that actually what we see through the recent years, 2 decades or so, is that the ultra-Orthodox is building an autonomy within Israel. It's an autonomy where the law is different, there's no enforcement of Israeli law, police prevented of be able to get into this autonomy to Bnei Brak, to Jerusalem, some neighborhoods, to other cities, and this autonomy basing itself on the Israeli resources, on Israeli taxpayers and Israeli soldiers and so forth. And this existence of an autonomy that is growing and going to be approximately a third of the Israelis in a few decades is impossible, because what it will do, it will make the Israeli state, the base for this autonomy, to collapse into itself. So we have to do with these 2 soldiers getting to Bnei Brak and being lynched by the mob. We have to do this with the prescription law, where actually giving again an exemption to the autonomy people from the duty of the majority. So if we go through different verticals of Israeli life, we'll see that in every major vertical, this autonomy have different rights and duties. And I think majority of Israelis, and we see it through the polls Shmuel is doing every month, is not willing to get this reality anymore.
But it's not yet really hurting Prime Minister Netanyahu when it comes to the polls. The polls that we're showing that are Haredi, that the overall public is against this and is not favor of this draft law. You don't see it necessarily hurting, Shmuel, the numbers of people who might vote for the current coalition, do you?
No, I disagree. I think that some of the erosion that we see in probable votes for the coalition are because of the draft law. You see some erosion in support for the Zionist religious party, Tzionut Datit, families who served in the reserves or in active duty during the war and are sick and tired of the current situation with the ultra-Orthodox draft. So they withdraw their support from the Zionist religious party and are looking for a new home. It's not clear that all of them will ultimately find a different home. There are other considerations for people when they go to the polls, but we do see people, supporters of Likud, supporters of Tzionut Datit, and maybe even of some other parties, who do add this layer of annoyance over the draft law to the bag of complaints they have for the government. So I think this is an issue that will play in the next election. I think that some opposition leaders are going to hammer the government over this issue. Naftali Bennett, Guy Eisenkot, people who represent the majority who serve, the coalition of the people who served the country when they wear uniform against the coalition that support draft dodgers. There's no other way to say that they're mandated by the law to join the military, and they're just draft dodger. And this coalition is trying to get them off the hook because of short-term political gain, when it's very clear to a majority of the public that such situation cannot go on forever. And as Shuki said, this could have been tolerable had the ultra-Orthodox community were, still 2% or 3% of the population. If this were a small community, you could say, okay, in each country you have smaller communities that behave differently than the majority. But when such community grows in such pace, the ultra-Orthodox community double itself every 10 years, every decade. And as Shuki said, they will become 20%, and then 25%, and 30% of the population according to official projections. So we cannot sustain the current situation without dramatic change. And clearly the government is not willing to make this change, and I think this will hurt them with the voters on election day. It doesn't mean that they're going to lose the election because of it, but it will erode their support on election day.
So Shmuel, just tell us, if you can, your new book that's come out so far just in Hebrew, B'inyan Haredim, as the title goes, I guess, on the issue of Haredim. What is the big takeaway in the book?
Well, the big takeaway is the combination of demography with challenges, and the basic idea is to tell Israelis that when they look at the challenge of the ultra-Orthodox autonomy, as Shuki defined it, they cannot look at it on a case-by-case basis. Look at the draft separately. Look at education separately. Look at how they treat democratic values separately. You have to look at this issue in a holistic way, because again, this is an autonomy that is being built within Israel by Israel. It is Israel building a structure that is almost autonomous, and that will not be sustainable over time. And for Israel to save itself from itself, it needs the majority of the public to say, to say stop, to say this cannot go on, or else to make a conscious decision that Israel is going on a path that leads towards something very different from the Israel that we know. Much poorer, much less educated, a country that many Israelis would not want to live in.
But Shuki, Netanyahu must understand this. He knows what's happening. He hears the IDF that tells him we're short 12,000, 15,000, however many soldiers it is. You look around, you look right, you look left, you look up, down. There's nowhere to take soldiers from, if not from the Haredi community. This is simple economics, simple demography. Even I, who don't do numbers, can understand the numbers. Why is he not doing what's right?
I can give two explanations. One is Netanyahu wants to survive, and for almost 2 decades, the best allies we have are the ultra-Orthodox, and he's willing to compromise on the interests of the Israelis in general, on the Israeli interest, in behalf of his personal survival, his political survival, and his party. Also can explain it, and this is the way, I hear the Netanyahu speakers, not himself, but people that talk for him for the sake of this strategy, and saying, it's true, but you can predict the future, and they change, something else will change, the economy will change, then the strategic circumstances will change, Iran will collapse, and then we have an Abraham Accord with Iran, the streets will reduce. So you can predict the future, and the interest of Israel is to keep the full right-wing government in place and protect the interests that we are protecting, which are very important, crucial for their survival and so forth. And the ultra-Orthodox, they will do by the time they will change, they will grow and realize that they have to be more involved in army and in economy and education. So we better keep the political situation and our survival in first priority for the sake of the state of Israel, a theory that have nothing to rely on, but that how they try to explain the willingness to compromise on soldiers, their soldiers' service and the soldiers of the duty, and basically what every other Israeli see as the interest of the state of Israel.
I'll
I have
just
to
say
say
that one of the best quotes that I have in the book is a quote of Netanyahu's from 2003, when he was finance minister, and explained in great detail why the situation with the ultra-Orthodox is unsustainable. He was, at the time, he was cutting a child allowance, and as he was telling the nation why he's doing what he was doing, he spoke about the challenge of Haredi demographic growth in great detail and with a perceptiveness that, had it guided him as prime minister, we wouldn't find ourselves in the situation we're at now, because 23 years later, Netanyahu can repeat the exact same words he used in 2003, and this is still true, but only more so.
And a lot of it because of his own doing.
Because of his policies.
Correct. That has allowed the situation to happen. And, I look at it also, because just to merge the two topics that we were just talking about, Iran and what's happening inside, maybe I'm wrong, and I'm happy to hear what your both thoughts are, but I think Iran we will deal with. We'll be, in the end, it'll sort itself out. What we do internally is our doing. And this is something that we won't be able to so easily wind back the clock and be able to fix. And I think if anything that we've learned over the last 2 years plus, it is exactly that point that we weaken ourselves, then we're doing the job for everyone else, and this is just a perfect example.
I
That's
just
the
want to
mirror
promote
image of Netanyahu's argument. He'll say, well, the Haredi issue will sort itself out. We must deal with Iran now, and the other thing will just go away someday.
I just want to promote Shmuel's book, which looks great. Just had the opportunity to go through today. He opened it and saying, it's a serious question and it's timely. We have to decide now, because time is crucial, and by time we wouldn't be able to solve it. So it's crucial, it's strategic, and it's timely.
Well, I second that, and Shmuel, congratulations on the book. We hope to see soon a version in English. I'm sure that many of the listeners and viewers of this podcast would love to see that. So let's get to work on that. But let me thank both of you, Shuki Friedman and Shmuel Rosner. Thank you both for joining us, and to all our viewers and listeners. As always, you can find us where podcasts can be found: YouTube, Spotify, Apple, website of Times of Israel. And we'll be back soon with another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI.